Hi everybody, in today's episode I'll show you a simple approach to color grading that instantly makes your image pop. We are not diving into anything overly complex, just simple adjustments that enhance colors and give your footage that polished feel. By the end you'll see how small tweaks can make a huge difference. Also, I see that most of you who are watching aren't subscribed yet, so if you find my videos helpful, hit that subscribe button. It really supports the channel and makes sure that you don't miss my future color grading tips. But now, let's dive in! For this episode I selected 3 shots that I want to grade in a more natural yet saturated style to create a more commercial look without any additional plugins, using only the standard tools in DaVinci Resolve. In the first clip I've already prepared 2 color space transform nodes, since these shots were filmed on a RED camera. In the first color space transform node I'm converting the input color space and gamma from red white gamut red log 3G10 into DaVinci white gamut DaVinci intermediate, as I prefer working in the huge DaVinci white gamut color space. And in the final color space transform node I'm converting DaVinci white gamut into my monitor color space, which is Rec 709 gamma 2.2, since this video is for YouTube. All color grading will be done between these 2 nodes in DaVinci white gamut color space. I'll close the effects and clips windows to get a larger view, and I also turn on my scopes in a dual view mode, so we can see both the vector scope and the waveform at the same time. I'll reposition them a bit. Alright, I can see that this clip is too bright, it's slightly overexposed, especially this part of the sky behind her is very bright, close to clipping. I also like to check this with my exposure indicator a lot. I'll create a node at the end of the node tree after Rec 709 conversion, then go into my indicator LUTs and choose this exposure indicator. The LUT shows that this area of the sky, which is shown in white, is very close to 100% of brightness, in other words, at risk of losing pixel data. The orange areas indicate that these parts are also very bright, around 90% of available luminance. The skin tone is also too bright. I want to keep it around middle gray, which is as standard for skin exposure in photography and cinematography, so indicator LUT shows that middle gray with a dark green color. Of course, brightness can be analyzed without the LUT, using the waveform, but for me it's more convenient and faster to use the LUT. That's why I created it. I'll leave it at the end of the node tree and call it exposure LUT. Then I'll create the first correction node in my tree. This will be the exposure node, where I will lower the brightness of the clip and create contrast. All of this can be done with the LUT enabled or disabled. I can just turn it on later to check the levels. So first I want to reduce the overall brightness of the clip. In my opinion, the best way to do this is in the HDR wheels, just reducing exposure in the global wheel. This works similarly to changing ISO in a camera. I'll reduce the overall brightness by about -0.6. I also want to create a bit more contrast, and for that I'll go into the primary wheels, lift, gamma and gain. Since I want deeper midtones, I'll create the contrast between midtones and highlights, meaning between the gamma and gain wheels. To do that, I'll lower the midtone brightness using the gamma wheel. To better see the changes, I usually prefer using my exposure LUT. I'll turn it on and show how the changes happen. Reset the gamma adjustments and start again. Lowering the gamma, I see the midtones becoming darker, and the dark green indication shows that they fall into middle gray. But I still want to keep the highlights in the sky bright to enhance the contrast. So I'll use the gain wheel to lift the highlights. Of course, this can be done without this exposure LUT. I'll raise the highlights, making sure not to exceed 100% of brightness, and also darken the midtones in the gamma wheel to create more contrast. Visually, I like how this looks. Maybe I'll also slightly lower the shadows in the lift wheel, even just by 0.1, and add a bit more contrast using the contrast slider. Around 1.1 looks good to me. I'll also tweak the contrast pivot points so it doesn't affect skin brightness too much. Around 3.5 in this case looks fine. Alright, let's now see what we've done in this node, before and after, before and after. The image has become much more vibrant and contrasty. Let's also check what the exposure LUT shows now. I can see that I've achieved darker skin tones, shown by the dark green indicator for middle gray. Meanwhile, the sky remains bright. Perfect. Since I want to create a more saturated commercial look, I'll create another node and call it saturation. For overall color saturation, I don't like using the default saturation slider in the primary wheels because it adds brightness to the colors, making them look unnatural. Proper saturation should make colors denser but not brighter. A similar result can be achieved using the saturation adjustment in the color slice. See how the colors not only become more saturated but slightly darker too. That's exactly what I like. But in this case I don't need strong saturation, so I'll just increase it slightly around 1.1. Let's check it before and after. Yes, it looks richer. Next, since this clip seems already well balanced, I don't need to adjust white balance, which I'll usually do at this stage, so I'll skip this step and move straight to creating a cleaner look. I'll create a new node and call it Look. Here I want to make secondary corrections, tweak some color tones and create a warmer vibe to make everything look nicer. The first thing I don't really like is the color of the sky. It looks a bit purplish blue, but I want it to be more teal, which will contrast beautifully with the warm skin tones and this field. So first I go into curves, hue versus hue, I'll select the blue color and by lifting the curve up, I'll shift it towards teal. Let's see before and after. This shade of blue perfectly contrasts with the skin tones. I also want to add more saturation to the blues, so I'll go to hue versus saturation, select two blue points to make the adjustment smoother, then delete one and add a bit more saturation. Something like this. In such cases, I usually like to start with a bit more saturation because I can always reduce it later if I need it. I also want to add a little saturation in the reds. Let's zoom it and lift them slightly, like so. And to make our hero to stand out more against this field, I'll reduce the yellow saturation a bit. I'll remove this green point for a smoother curve and lower the yellow-green saturation, like this. Let's compare before and after, before and after. Usually I make such curve adjustments in a separate node called secondaries, but since I'm not aiming for a specific stylized look here, I'm doing everything in a one node. Now I want to add some warmth, especially in the highlights. I'll use the primary wheels, lift, gamma and gain in the same node. As I said, I want to warm up the highlights, so in the gain wheel I'll add some reds, slightly reduce blue to shift towards yellow, and also add a bit of magenta by slightly reducing the green channel. Don't worry if the image looks oversaturated now. As I said, I will fix saturation later if I need to. It just helps to see which colors we are working with. Then in the gamma wheel I'll add a bit of blue to slightly cool down the skin tone, about like that. And since I see that the shadows are too warm, reddish, I'll reduce red in the lift wheel. And reducing red brings out some greens, so I'll also reduce green. Like that. Let's check before and after. Much nicer. But I feel like I want to add a bit more brightness to the reds, especially in her skin, and I know an interesting way to do that. I'll create another adjustment node before my look node and show you a little trick. Going into RGB Mixer, the first thing I'll do is switch to the monochrome mode. But then in the node settings, I'll change the composite mode to luminosity. So these adjustments affect only brightness and not color. I'll name this node RGB Skin. Now each channel contains only its representative color, red, green and blue. We can adjust their luminance using these sliders. Basically brighten or darken the reds, greens or blues. But the key here is to do it carefully so you don't break the image. At this point I want to brighten the reds a bit, so I'll pull up the red slider, something like this. Let's check it before and after, so you can see we've slightly brightened her skin and she looks brighter now. This is a trick that I use quite often and really like the result. It feels more natural. Next, I'll create another node where I want to use one of my favorite effects, and it's glow. It adds a bit more contrast, richness and softness, giving this digital image more a cinematic feel. So in the effects window, I'll find the glow effect and drop it into my new node. Then under the advanced controls, I'll change the mode to soft light. Then bring the shine threshold down to 0 and adjust the spread. Usually I prefer between 0.2 and 0.3. This works well for me. Since glow adds a lot of brightness, I'll control that using the gain and gamma sliders. In this case, I'll reduce the brightness using gain, and since the midtones got a bit too dark, I'll rise them back by using the gamma slider. Glow also boosts saturation quite a lot, so I'll put that back using the saturation slider. Something like this. Let's check before and after. As you can see, the effect is very strong, so I usually reduce the overall impact using global blend. Right now, I think I'll bring it down to like 50%. Looks much more natural now. One more time, before and after, before and after. Much softer. As for the color saturation, in this case I want a more saturated image, and that makes sense. I'll create one more node at the end of my node tree. Let me explain using my saturation indicator LUT. I'll add it into this node, and what do we see? The green and yellow indicators show proper skin tone saturation under natural daylight. But here I also see this red indication, which under standard conditions would suggest some oversaturation. However, considering our hero is standing on the yellow field, and the sun's rays are reflecting and filling her with a warm yellow light, this saturation is actually quite normal for this scene. What I also like about this situation is that the color saturation creates a kind of vignette. Since the viewer's focus always falls in the most saturated parts of the frame, so in this case our hero is in the center, and this orange-red indication shows those saturated areas. Technically, I could end the color grading here, but I feel the focus on the hero is still a bit lacking, and I can fix that with masks. I'll create a few parallel nodes after the look node. Since I like to leave effects like glow and so on at the end of the node tree, in the first node I want to slightly reduce the brightness of this width field, which will make the hero stand out more. In this situation, I'll create a gradient mask to isolate the field, something like this, with a soft transition. So right now it's showing what I've selected. Next I'll go to the tracker and maybe turn off 3D tracking, since there's not so much camera movement in this shot, and press track. Now the tracker automatically follows the field and moves the mask with it. Done! This mask has tracked perfectly. Next, I want to remove the part of the hero that falls into this mask, so the adjustments don't affect her. For that, I'll create another, this time circular mask. I'll place it over our hero, reduce the size a bit, maybe make it a little taller, and I'll make it very soft so there are no harsh edges. Something like this. I also need to track this mask, so again I go into the tracker. This time I will turn off rotate so the mask doesn't rotate and press track. Done! Now in the mask settings I'll turn on the highlights view again, and I see that instead of excluding the hero I actually added her into the mask, so I need to set the circular mask to subtract mode. Okay, I've removed her from the mask now. Let's see how it looks. Yes, not bad at all. I can always adjust the mask later, but I'll leave it like this for now. Since I want to darken the width field, I'll go into the primary wheels and use this highlight slider to lower the brightest areas, like this. Let's check the before and after. Good. I might also slightly reduce the highlights in the gain wheel. I like it better. Before and after. And because the width stalks are very textured, I'll reduce the mid detail using the mid detail slider. Not too strong, just slightly soften it. Around -24 should be good. Let's check it again before and after. You can clearly see how our hero pops out against the field. I might lower the circular mask a bit and slightly increase its size, just making sure it's not too noticeable. Yeah, looks good. Also, the color of the width is very close to the skin tone. I'd like to separate them a bit, so I'll go into hue versus hue curves, select the yellow, and push it slightly down towards a more yellow-green tone, just a touch. Then in hue versus saturation, I'll slightly reduce the saturation of the reds in the width and maybe rise the yellows a bit. Something like that. Again, before and after, before and after. Now the hero clearly stands out from the background. Next, in the following node, I usually create a vignette that is darkening the edges of the image to focus light on the subject, but in this case the camera lens has already created a vignette, and in my taste it's even a bit too strong. The blue sky at the edges looks too dark, oversaturated, and I don't like that. So I'll create a reverse vignette, in other words, slightly brighten these areas. I'll make a circular mask, place it near the brightest part of the sky. I'll increase the size and softness, like this. No need to track it, since the vignette is caused by the lens and moves along with it. So all I need to do, invert the mask so it affects the outer areas, not the center. Then in the primary wheels, I'll add the brightness to the midtones in the gamma wheel. Just slightly soften the vignette, around +3. And I also want to reduce the saturation of that dark blue color. So I'll go into the hue versus sat curves, select the blue range and decrease its saturation. Let's see what we've got before and after, before and after. I think it looks much softer. Next, I want to add a bit more contrast to the tree as it looks a bit too flat. So I'll create another parallel node. Again, I'll use the circular mask and isolate the tree like this, soften the mask, maybe enlarge it a bit, shift it slightly right. Good. Go into the tracker again and track the mask. Now I'll go into the primary wheels and slightly darken the midtones in the gamma wheel. Okay. I also want to reduce the blue saturation in the sky again using curves. Select the blue and lower its saturation. Also, the tree looks a bit too yellow, so for a more natural result, I'll make it slightly greener. In the gamma wheel, I'll add a touch of green, just a bit. Let's see, before and after, before and after. I like this. Also, I'd like to check her skin tone. It seems a bit too yellow for me. I'll create another node at the end of the node tree for a skin tone indicator lot. These bright parts of the skin should be yellow-greenish, especially since she's standing in the yellow field that reflects that tone. But for midtones of the skin and shadows, I'd like a more natural orange tone. Let's check this using the LUT. I'll use the perfect skin indicator LUT and name this node Skin LUT. This LUT splits skin tones into 3 colors, green, orange and magenta, where green indicates more yellow-green tones, which are typically skin highlights in the natural lighting environment. Orange shows natural skin tones, also indicated by the vector scope line, and it's usually our skin midtones, and the shadows usually appear more reddish or magenta. In this case, I feel it lacks those deeper orange, red, magenta tones, so I'll go back to the Look node. And in Hue versus Hue curves, select the red and slightly rise it, shifting the tone towards more like orange-red, not too much, like +2.5. Now I'll disable the skin indicator LUT. As you can see, she now stands out more from the tone of the field. I like that. If I wanted to push my hero even more, I could of course create another parallel node and again use a circular mask. First, I'll set its softness to 0 for better tracking results, leave the tracking settings as they are, and press Track. Now I can adjust the mask size and add some softness, maybe rise it a bit to cover more of her face. Something like that. Let's check the selection. Yes, it's good. And here, using the gain wheel in the primary wheels, I'll slightly brighten the hero. Just a touch. Before and after, before and after. She stands out even more and draws the viewer's eye. Now we can decide on an overall saturation level of the clip. Let's go back to the saturation node and see what feels right. I'll probably leave it a bit higher, around 0.8. Here's before and after. At the end, I like to check the results using indicator LUTs. I'll turn on the exposure indicator and see how the skin brightness looks. As we can see, the dark green shows her skin falls within the middle gray range and then goes slightly brighter. It's perfect for this natural commercial look. And I'll also turn on the saturation indicator, everything within the range, and still functions as a kind of vignette. Perfect. And finally, I like to add some halation and bloom to add a bit more elegance. For that, I'll create another node after the glow node. Here I will apply the standard DaVinci Resolve effect, Film Look Creator. But in the presets, I'll choose Clean Slate to disable all default cinematic looks, since I don't need them here. Then scroll down and enable halation. Zoom in on our hero to see it better. Enable the effect. I can see the yellow halation appears, but I don't like the yellow color, so I'll go into the hue slider and shift it more towards red. I also feel the effect is a bit too strong, so I'll reduce its amount and radius, something like that. Let's check it before and after. Also, I will add a bloom. By default, it's very soft, barely visible, before and after, almost unnoticeable. So I'll increase the effect to around 0.86 and increase its radius. Look at her, you can see the effect showing up. Let's check it before and after, before and after. As you can see, it softens the transition from bright to dark areas, adding overall softness to the image. These effects don't drastically change the image, but do add some elegance. I'll name this node Halation Bloom. Good. Now let's walk through what we did in this grade step by step. I'll organize the nodes to keep the node tree cleaner, select all the grading nodes and disable them. And now let's look at what we've did. First was exposure and contrast, then saturation, then look, next RGB mixer for brighter reds, then masks. This one darkened the field to highlight the hero, then this reverse vignette to lighten the edges, this added contrast and some greens to the tree, and the last one brightened the hero. And finally the effects, glow and halation bloom. I really like this final warm, soft and saturated version. Next I'll enable the clips and move to the next. Now I can copy the grade from the first clip and paste it to the next. Right-click on the graded clip and select Apply Grade, so all the grading transfers. The only thing that the masks created for the previous clip don't fit here and need to be disabled. I'll just leave this reverse vignette mask, but maybe reduce its strength by half. Let's check the clip. The hair seems a bit too reddish to me, so I'll fix that and make them more neutral. I'll go back to the look node into the log wheels, and since the hair is very dark, I'll use the shadow wheel and slightly shift the tint. So I'll reduce a bit of reds and some greens too. I'll also slightly rise the shadows so the hair isn't so dark. Check it before and after. Zoom it to see it better. Before and after. Fine. And again, comparing with the previous clip and this one, yes, looks good. The only thing is that I'd like to brighten her dress a bit. It looks too dark. So I'll create another parallel node and go into the qualifier. Choose this 3D qualifier, then select the dress, rise the clean black a bit to clean up the dark areas, add some blur and pull the ratio in a bit. This selection looks good. Then into the primary wheels I will add a touch of brightness in the gain wheel, just a little. Check it before and after, before and after. Scroll the clip a bit. Yes, looks nice. Compare it again with the previous clip. Good. Now let's go into the last clip. Again, I'll copy the grade from the previous one. What do I see here? Since there's a harsh lighting in this clip, the tones are slightly different, but easily fixable. First, I'll disable the dress mask. The dress is already well lit, but I'll keep the reverse vignette again. Then in the look node, I'll slightly correct that greenish tint by removing some green in the gamma wheel. Like so. Let's compare the clips. Okay, then maybe go to the exposure node and rise the shadows in the lift wheel a bit, and maybe slightly lower with the highlights and gain. Compare the clips again. Fine, but this one feels a bit less saturated, so I'll go into the saturation node and increase it a bit. Something like that. We can compare saturation across clips using my saturation indicator LUT, enable both clips. Yes, I can see the indication match. Yellow, green, red indication on her skin are consistent. So perfect, I've done them all. Let's now watch all the clips on the full screen. Thanks for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed this episode and I'll be looking forward to reading your comments. But now don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss my future videos, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!